Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a really big, really human question, but we're doing it through the lens of one of the world's most beautiful and enduring art forms. We're going to see how, for thousands of years, an entire culture grappled with mortality, not with easy answers, but with absolutely profound poetry.
So let's just dive right in with the question that, let's be honest, every single one of us has to face at some point. It is universal, it's inevitable, and how we answer it really defines a lot about how we choose to live. So, what do we do when we're forced to confront the fact that our time here is limited?
Well, for more than 2,000 years, China's greatest poets stared this very question down, and they wrote about it. And what they left behind for us is this incredible, centuries-long conversation that is so much more complex than just sadness or fear. It's this rich tapestry of philosophy, of history, and intensely personal struggle.
Now, to really understand their answers, we first need to understand the world they lived in. We kind of need a philosophical toolkit, you could say. You see, these poets were shaped by three major schools of thought, and each one gave them a completely unique lens for looking at life and death. Okay, so these three ideas are going to be our guide. First up, you have Confucianism. This was all about duty and legacy. From this point of view, death isn't just an end, it's a chance to prove your righteousness. The value of your life is measured by what you contribute to your family, to society. Then you've got Taoism, which has a totally different vibe. It's about harmony with nature. Death isn't some tragedy, it's just a natural part of the cosmic cycle, something to be accepted calmly. And then Buddhism enters the picture, introducing this idea of reincarnation. That death is just one step in a huge cycle of rebirth, and the real goal is to eventually find liberation from that cycle altogether.
So, with our new toolkit ready to go, let's start our journey. We're going to travel through China's great poetic dynasties and actually see how this conversation about mortality changed, how it evolved, and how it got deeper and deeper over centuries of both turmoil and incredible brilliance.
Here's our basic roadmap for this journey. We're going to start way back in the earliest eras, with this really raw grief and heroic ideals. Then we'll see a huge shift towards something more spiritual, transcendence. After that, we dive into the Golden Age, the Tang Dynasty, where personal sorrow meets social consciousness, and we'll finish up with the deep, philosophical calm of the song poets.
All right, first stop, ancient China. You know, in the earliest poems we have, from the pre-Qin and Han periods, death is often this big collective experience. It's about heroic sacrifice for a greater cause, for the state. And the grief you see in these poems is just direct, it's raw, it is completely unfiltered. And this heroic ideal, it's captured perfectly by the legendary poet Official Kuei-yun. He wrote, "Though I should die 9 times, I would have no regrets." I mean, wow. This isn't just about being brave. This is the pure Confucian ideal in action, choosing righteousness, choosing your principles over your own life.
But then this heroic ideal starts to change. During the Weijin period, China was thrown into immense social chaos. You know, the old Confucian certainties just weren't holding up anymore. And in all this turmoil, poets started to turn inward. They were influenced by Taoism and the new ideas of Buddhism. They weren't looking for a heroic death anymore. They were looking for spiritual liberation from a world that had become so painful.
And you can just feel that shift so perfectly in this line from Tao Yanming, one of the era's greatest. "Let us ride on the cosmic process to our final destination, gladly accepting my fate. What is there to doubt?" You hear the change? It's not about fighting fate anymore. It's about calmly accepting it, flowing with it as part of nature. That is pure Taoism right there.
And now, we enter the Tang Dynasty. This is the absolute golden age of Chinese poetry. And here, the poets do something incredible. They blend the personal with the political. Their private heartaches over loss and mortality get woven directly into these powerful laments for the suffering of society, especially during the devastating An Lushan Rebellion.
The absolute master of this style was Du Fu. Imagine this. He's trapped in the capital city, which has been torn apart by war. He's separated from his family. And in that moment, he writes this unforgettable line,
A letter from home is worth 10,000 pieces of gold. For him, the fear of death wasn't some abstract idea. It was this immediate, gut-wrenching fear of losing the people you love in the chaos, the fear that this separation could become permanent at any second.
So after all of that emotional intensity of the Tang, the poets of the Song dynasty kind of take a deep breath. They take a more rational and more philosophical approach. They were influenced by a renewed form of Confucianism, and they began to reflect on how fleeting life is, but with the sense of calm, almost intellectual curiosity.
And who could capture this better than the great Su Shi? He gives us this beautiful metaphor. Life, he says, is like a wild goose that lands for a moment in the snow. It leaves a temporary footprint, and then it flies on, with no real trace of where it came from or where it's going next. It's such a powerful image of acceptance, of being detached from life's fleeting moments.
So we've seen this incredible evolution, but that brings up a bigger question, right? Why? Why did they pour so much of their creative energy into writing about death? Well, the answer is that this poetry was way more than just art. It was a vital tool for living.
This poetry really served three crucial functions. First, you could say it was a form of therapy. It was a way for the poet, and for anyone who read it, to process deep grief and find some kind of solace. Second, it was a time capsule. It became a carrier of historical memory that tells us about the suffering and the resilience of entire generations. And finally, it was a philosophical tool. It was a way to think about the value of life precisely because it's going to end.
So, what can we take away from all of this?
After this whole journey, what does this ancient conversation about mortality, captured in these amazing poems, what does it offer us? Right here, right now, in our own lives.
What we see when we look at the whole arc, from the heroic defiance of Kui Wan all the way to the quiet acceptance of Su Shi, is that these poets weren't just describing death. They were actively using poetry as a kind of technology for the soul. It was a tool for healing from loss, a tool for preserving memory against the relentless tide of time, and a tool for building meaning in a world where our time is limited.
And that, right there, is the enduring power of their work. They show us that facing our mortality isn't really about finding a single neat answer. It's about engaging in a continuous, honest conversation. Their words reached across 1,000 years to find us, which kind of leaves one final thought, doesn't it? What words will we leave behind?